I don't know why, although I do suspect the movie Monster Squad played a big part, but I love the Universal Monster toys. Wolfman, Dracula, Gillman, they just look great on a shelf. And over the years, there have been numerous companies who have produced figures from the line, and today on Rewind Toys, we're going to be giving you the history of some, not all, of course, of those toys. Oh, and this is just part one. So as I said, this week is going to be part one in our Universal Monster toy discussion. And this week we're going to be keeping to the 70s. Next time around, we're going to dive into the 80s and 90s. But with that, let's go ahead and get started. So for the most part, I'm going to keep this in chronological order. And I'm going to do my very best to do justice to each of these lines. But we have quite a bit to get through, so bear with me. And we're going to start our creepy conversation back in 1973 with a company that's become synonymous with Halloween, and that company is Ben Cooper. The Ben Cooper Company, named after its founder, Ben Cooper Sr., it was founded in 1937, and it started off strictly making cheap plastic Halloween costumes. But eventually they would begin producing rack toys, and amongst those were the Universal Monsters. Well, I mean, sort of. To be fair, they didn't call them that, and they never used the official names in any way, but let's be honest, that's what they were. Released under the name House Haunters and made from rubber, they were referred to as jigglers, which made sense because, well, they jiggle. They're captured in a single pose, have a very unique smell, and were painted kind of haphazardly. They were generic versions of Dracula, Wolfman, and Frankenstein's monster, and they all fell somewhat under the Universal Monster umbrella. But if you're a horror nut, there was also witches, skeletons, a black cat, a devil, and a scarecrow that you might want to keep your eye out for as well. Also, there was a caveman, a hunchback, a mummy, a smaller Frankenstein monster, and a different style of Dracula that, while not containing the Ben Cooper branding, were often sold alongside them and most believe were actually distributed by the Ben Cooper Company. I dig these guys for their sort of shoddy, overly creepy paint job, and just for pure nostalgia. Now, next on the list, we're going to stick in the year 1973, and this is the AHI official world-famous Super Monsters. AHI stood for Azrak Hamway International, and it was a New York-based novelty toy company founded in 1964. They would go on to acquire the Remco name in 1974, but in 73, they would release a line called World Famous Super Monsters. Now, these were licensed by Universal. These were official figures. They were 8 inches tall, and they would end up competing with another line, which we'll talk about next. But first, we're going to talk about these. Now, releasing in this line was Frankenstein's monster, Dracula, Wolfman, Mummy, and Creature from the Black Lagoon. All were articulated in the knees, the elbows, the ankles, the waist, and the neck. And they featured cloth outfits. I mean, not so much Creature from the Black Lagoon, but I mean, he was a fish. He didn't wear clothes. Now, to me, these looked fantastic. Even the box art was such a product of its time, and it really gives you that kind of nostalgic monster vibe that you kind of want from these. Now, today, these are highly collectible, often pulling $300, $500, even more, depending, of course, on condition. Now, a few things of interest to note on these. Most were officially licensed, but Dracula was reportedly not, and thus a generic Dracula character. Now, the figures themselves were actually produced in a bunch of different factories, and that meant variations were common, such as differing body colors, hard head and soft head versions. And if you're wanting to collect, know that Creature from the Black Lagoon seems to be the most rare in this line. Now, there are 2 different versions of the creature. There's the thick-waisted, which is the most rare, and a thinner waist, often referred to as female creature. And they also made a King Kong figure that many collectors tend to add to their line as well. Also, while you're at it, you might want to go ahead and keep an eye out for that Creature from the Black Lagoon squirt gun. because it was made by them and it was just, I mean, it's just weird enough to want. So the world-famous Super Monsters had a lot of similarities with another company popular at the time, and that company was Mego. And so, not to be outdone, Mego would release its own line of Universal Monster figures in 1974. They were called the Mego Mad Monsters. Now, these were not officially licensed, but the influence was just really clear, and their design was nothing short of amazing. Using their own Mego spin on the names as a way to skirt around the legal ramifications, they released 4 figures. The Monster Frankenstein. I guess if you just say it in reverse, that makes it different enough. The Horrible Mummy. So you add horrible, and it's different. The Human Wolfman. Well, that just seems redundant. And Dreadful Dracula. These were also 8 inches tall and articulated. That articulation would actually lead to one of the variants we're going to talk about. See, early versions had these like metal rivets in the joints, but later versions would switch to plastic, which can also help collectors date when the figures came from. And they also featured cloth outfits, much like the AHI versions. Now, Wolfman was pretty cool because they gave him fur fringes around his wrists. But the best part of these guys were the hands and the eyes because they glowed in the freaking dark. I mean, if you're going to make monster characters, to add a glow feature is just, to me, it's just genius. Now, variants of these mostly happened as a way to avoid legal issues. For example, the first Frankenstein monster had a flat top head, but it was just considered too similar to the Universal version, so they slapped blue paint on top of it before eventually they just resculpted it all together. They did a similar thing with Dracula, this time going with a red paint before switching that to a new head. Now, all of this is great, but what I love most was the packaging. The first versions came in boxes that looked just amazing. Designed by comic book artist Gray Morrow, they offered like full panel renditions, each its own thing, each an original. Now later, there would also be a window boxed version, which is actually really rare, and then an extremely rare Kresge carded version, named because they were backing cards created specifically for Kmart Kresge stores. Now these ones, they're money. If you can find one of those, you've done a really good job. I mean, if you can afford it, you've done a really good job. Now I also need to mention the Vinyl Mad Monster Castle playset. So simple, but so cool. It came with a drawbridge, a dungeon, and a laboratory table. For monster fans and Mego fans, these figures are highly sought after, and I can see why. Loose with no box, you might be able to snag one for like $120 to $200, but if you happen upon one with its box, those prices, they're going to double or even triple. Now we're going to go back to AHI because they released a series of Bendums in 1974 around the Universal Monster license, and those are called Super Monster Bendums, which just makes sense. Now I have to admit, these cards are amongst my favorite cards. Not the figures, the actual packaging, the cards. They're spooky but brightly colored, all at the same time, and they're whimsical, they're hypnotic, and they're fun, but they also get the monster vibe across. Now, coming in at around 5 inches, they had that traditional wire inner core so they could be twisted and somewhat posed. There were 5. There was Wolfman, Frank, Dracula, Creature, and Mummy. And also, there was a King Kong version of this as well. And I know that sort of falls over. King Kong, not officially a Universal Monster, but I know he kind of falls into the same. A lot of people who want to collect these want to collect King Kong as well. Now, loose, you can grab one of the Bendums for like $70 or $80, and that's in decent condition. And some were actually sold loose, so, there's that. But I would want the card myself, and that does escalate the price a lot. But like I said, these are some of my favorite, just the cards. The packaging, it's just so much fun. I personally would want that. Hey, guys, you know what's really scary? Not hitting subscribe. I mean, it's scary for me. Look, if you have like 2 seconds and you don't mind going down, pushing that thumbs up button, hitting that subscribe button, really means a lot to me, and I appreciate each and every one of you, and I really hope you come back. So if you don't mind, hit subscribe, and we're going to get back to it. Okay, next up comes the Lincoln International Monsters from 1975. Considered almost knockoffs of the AHI and Mego figures, but marketed as less expensive alternatives. We once again feature an 8-inch version of the monsters, but with a couple of added characters. There was Mummy, there was Frankenstein's monster, Wolfman, and Dracula. They were there, but added was the Hunchback and the Phantom of the Opera. And this is sort of where we see those two characters finally making it into the fray, and they would become somewhat common after that as well. They were so similar to their predecessors that they often used outfits that were just really close, and were even rumored to use some like hand molds and stuff from older like model kits. So it's even rumored that some of the parts weren't even original. So the outfits and the hands and stuff, they looked like pre-existing stuff. Distributed by Louis Galoob, they had a number of product runs, and that meant their packaging and details were changed from time to time, meaning there are multiple variants. They are rare, and for monster collectors, they are highly collectible. Packaging, as I said, differs quite a bit, but I appreciate that they offered like background scenes that made sense with the character backstory. So if you look at the packaging on a lot of these, the background, like the Wolfman makes sense with the Wolfman, and Dracula makes sense with Dracula. Oh, they also released a figure called Girl Victim. Honestly, she was just a doll. Some say likely a reproduction of the 70s Dawn doll, which you see right here. I'm guessing they just tossed a different outfit on an existing doll as a way to bring in some extra money and slap the title Girl Victim. And then, you know, if you're a completist, you kind of have to have it, right? All right, so we have one more to talk about in this episode, but be looking out because next week we're going to continue this series with the 80s and 90s monster releases. So this one's a little different in that it isn't figures, but it's still the Universal Monsters, and these things are so very cool. So in 1975, Post Cereal released a series of Universal Monster posters in their Sugar Crisp cereal. Now these featured Frankenstein's monster, Phantom of the Opera, the Wolfman, and the creature from the Black Lagoon. They were 11 by 14 inches and created in collaboration with the art mimicking the box art from the old Aurora monster model kits. Now we didn't talk about those, but those were model kits you could buy. They were very popular before the action figures. You've probably seen them before. Here's the coolest thing about these posters. They glowed in the dark, and I've mentioned I love glow-in-the-dark stuff, but for a small poster, 11 by 14 glow-in-the-dark monster poster, hell yeah. But if you think that's all, if you think this is all we have to talk about...
But wait! There's more!
Not only did they release the 4 posters, but they also released 4 glow-in-the-dark finger puppet monster heads. Believed to be a way of competing with the General Mills monster cereals like Count Chocula and Boo Berry and Frankenberry. For those hardcore monster fans who were wanting to know, the cereals started in 1971, so also in the 70s. These are the sort of bizarre one-offs that someone like me goes nuts for, and I'm not alone. Monster collectors are always on the lookout for these hand finger puppet heads, whatever. They're cool looking, and on display they are friggin' amazing. On the heads, I've seen them sell anywhere from like $40 all the way up to $100 each. Now, if you're diligent and patient, you could sometimes come across deals where people will sell a couple of them for an okay price. Like I have seen 2 for $40, which is a really good deal. So if you see those and you really look, you might be able to find them. Also, sometimes they just pop up at like flea markets, things like that, where people just don't always know what they are. I mean, I get that. If you're not a collector, you just may not know. Now, as for the posters, in decent condition, one's going to cost you $60 to $100. Now, I dig old ephemera stuff and paper stuff like that. Just ask me about my framed Jurassic Park McDonald's promotional menus or my Jurassic Park fry containers sometimes. Those are real things I actually have, and I love them. Now, I wish I could give credit to a specific artist for these posters, but I actually couldn't track down a name, like any specific name. If any of you out there happen to know who was responsible for these posters or even any kind of idea, please drop in the comments because we would love to know. as I mentioned, we're going to be doing a part 2 next week. This was a big topic, and I know I missed some stuff, but that's okay because I have you guys, and I do welcome your input. If you had a favorite 70s Universal Monster line, or you know of one I didn't mention, go ahead and drop that in the comments so others can be aware of it. Next episode, we're going to be going into the 80s and 90s, so please come back. And remember, until next we meet, when it comes to vintage, spooky monster toy goodness, the hunt is still half the fun.